Welcome back to the all-time best list, and we're up to Vancouver. Yes, yes, I thank Vancouver fans for being patient. Vancouver, starting with a V, means they're at the end of a lot of my playlists, which is why I've started doing them, reverse alphabetical as well as full alphabetical forward. And the best of the Canucks is really an interesting list in that you have some pretty good teams. They've never quite reached that level of greatness. You ask fans in Vancouver, there are teams that have been great in our eyes, but you ask fans outside Vancouver, and odds are it's probably a different story. So, that being said, the all time best for the Vancouver Canucks point wise is Henrik Sedin. 1,070 career points for Vancouver. And you can't argue against the Sedins being likely tied for the greatest Canuck players ever. So, when I do a list on the all-time greats of the Canucks, and because I've done the favorites list, and when I do the all-time greats, odds are, how do you not have Henrik and Daniel as co-number ones on that list? I had to close the window. Apparently, all the planes are out today. Daniel Sedin leads them in all-time goals with 393. The assist leader, Henrik Sedin, 830. So Henrik, one of the greatest assist players that I've ever seen. And if you're wondering, yes, this is an Elias Pettersson jersey, and I'm wearing it because Pettersson's not on the board. To me, he hasn't done enough yet as a Canuck for me to have him on the all-time greats of the board. And power play goals, Daniel Sedin, 138. Pettersson's got a way to go to get to that 138. But Pettersson, likely, a few years down the road, he will be seen as one of the all-time great Canucks. Just again, when you're in year two, I don't see how I could do that. Not when we did the Toronto one yesterday, and I didn't have all their core players. And it gets kind of ugly when you do that. Then it just turns into an entire board of here's all the guys who played for this team. Now the honorable mentions, the guys who aren't on the board now. Gino Odjick for penalty minutes, 2,127. He could have had those in a year. He was an ornery guy, and you got the feeling sometimes the teams were trying to set him off and get him off his game, and then when he'd go off, they'd regret it pretty much immediately. He's not wearing a jersey. Where did his shirt go? And that's why we have tie downs. Gino Odjick's tie downs. So I think legit it was Odjick's the reason why we have all the tie downs and the rules on removal of jersey at this point in the game. Because there was that one brawl with St. Louis, and man, it wasn't a brawl of teams. It was just Odjick versus the Blues. Who wants a piece? Who wants some? Anyways, in terms of the all-time greats, Marcus Naslund is probably one of the greatest captains I've seen who didn't quite get to the Stanley Cup. And of course, famously, he said we choked. And I thought that was courageous. And of course, fans outside of the Vancouver fandom thought it was great and used that quote endlessly. Trevor Linden, Mr. Canuck. Or is he? See, so Trevor Linden, you could argue is Mr. Canuck, or you could argue Stan Smeel if you go back far enough. Or you could argue that the Sedins, both of them put together, are Mr. Canuck because they're twins. So you can just show their face and go, this is Henrik. And people would go, I think it's Daniel, but it could be Henrik, I guess. And you can tell them apart kind of, sort of, but you kind of have to have them next to each other. I can't really tell the difference. Even now, I go, is that Daniel? Is that Henrik? If I just see a picture of one and I don't have the name on the bottom. The term of Mr. Canuck, I guess we could do I could do at some point, go through every team and who epitomizes each team. So for the Islanders, you could argue Mike Bossy was like the ultimate Islander, but that could be an interesting video for another time. But yeah, Bure, if you're talking about the all-time great goal scorers in Vancouver, Bure's the guy. He was exciting, and I remember, he got fans out of their seats in his rookie year, in his debut. The thing was, before he made his debut, Vancouver was actually doing really well. And adding Bure to a team that was actually doing really well made it all the more deadly. I still, and we'll get to the argument over which is the best team, but I really like the 91-92 Canucks. Todd Bertuzzi, controversial figure, yes. Has to be on the board, also yes. I thought it was nice to see him in a Canucks jersey for one of the throwback nights they had recently. And it's nice to see that part of history is finally, there's that healing that had to happen between fan and player. And I didn't get the feeling that it was the Canuck fans that ran him out of town as much as it was media. As long as he was still wearing a Canucks jersey, there were always going to be questions over the Moore incident, and they weren't going to go away until he went somewhere else. So I felt that the entire situation was awful. Of course, Moore loses his career out of the whole thing, and that was awful. But I also thought that the way that the media was treating Bertuzzi years after the fact, it was baffling to me. Tony Tanti, very good goal scorer for the Vancouver Canucks. Easy to kind of lose in the mix because the 80s, the Canucks were pretty bad, pretty historically bad. Stan Smeel, as I said, probably Mr. Canuck during the 80s. Thomas Gradin would be a close second there. Didn't last as long with the Canucks as Smeel, ends up going to Boston at one point, but Gradin, pretty key guy. Edler, Lidster are the two defensemen I have up there. You can make an argument for Jovanovski. You can make an argument for Oland as well. For me, Edler, and again, we can have the debate over how effective he is, and is he legitimately a top two defenseman, or should he have been a number 3, number 4 guy, and because of Vancouver's lack of depth on the blue line, did he play more than he should have? That's a good debate to have, but I still think he belongs up there. And Doug Lidster, who was sometimes their only defenseman during certain games in the 80s. And it was insane. I was even trying to look up numbers on how many minutes he played for Vancouver, but they weren't tracking all of that back then. And so, I know it was a lot. I know he played a ton. And so by the time he was traded out, they'd kind of wore him out. They did the same thing with Garth Butcher on the blue line. Now, we will have a discussion at some point about guys like Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson, and others who are currently either in the Canucks system on their way up and or have made the roster and look pretty good. There's a pretty good crop of Canucks on the horizon and or on the team that look like they're going to be on this list at some point, but I don't put them on that list right now. Now moving to goaltending. Roberto Luongo, all-time wins leader with 252. And I thought Luongo was the best goalie I've ever seen in a Vancouver jersey. And I know there are many who are going to say Kirk McLean, who leads in shots against with 14,428. And Kirk McLean, from a nostalgic point, yes. Kirk McLean, I totally get that. McLean was fantastic for periods of the early mid-90s. But the all-around best goalie I've ever seen play for Vancouver is Luongo. Now, Schneider will never know. 927 save percentage is the all-time leader on the Canucks in save percentage. He was fantastic. His first call-up, it was kind of a shaky call-up, but once he was a full-time NHLer, he was fantastic. And Corey Schneider, we'll never know what he might have been as a Canucks starter. Luongo leads the team in shutouts as well, 38 in his career in Vancouver. So Luongo, the best goalie that I would argue that the Panthers ever had, and the best goalie that the Canucks have ever had. So, honorable mentions with goaltenders Richard Brodeur, who went on that incredible run in 82, and was a pretty good goaltender during parts of the 80s. He also had some pretty iffy seasons in there, and it was interesting because towards the end of his run in Vancouver, it did kind of feel like Vancouver needed to replace Brodeur, and for whatever reason they weren't doing it. You'd have to ask Harry Neal what exactly caused that delay, but it did. It felt like they needed to kind of change things up a bit. Dan Cloutier. Cloutier gets remembered for some bad goals in the playoffs and for meltdowns. The entire Canucks melted down in those playoffs. It's the same as Luongo, where, yes, he had bad games, but the Canucks never bailed him out of a bad game. And it felt kind of the same with Cloutier. The other thing with Cloutier, and I mentioned this when I talk about Dan Cloutier, he did play through injuries, and sometimes you got the feeling that maybe he should have been sitting when he was playing, and his pride made him fight through injuries that other goaltenders might have taken themselves out of the game for. And Gary Suitcase Smith, I'm going to have him up there because for Canuck teams that did win their division and played pretty well in the mid-late 70s, he was there. And, of course, famously, he stormed out on the team eventually, but at one point he was Vancouver Canucks. He was their best goaltender, and yeah. So they've had some other notable goaltenders, but I think in terms of the best, the names that are on the board should suffice. But again, since it's Vancouver, I could throw a whole bunch. I could have Hanlon up there. I loved Hanlon. I remember when they picked Brodeur, and I'm like, oh, why didn't they pick Hanlon? I liked Hanlon. And this, again, he's the little kid, right? So best team, I went with the 2010-2011 Stanley Cup finalists. But I've got to be honest, the 91-92 Canucks, that there was just a special feeling with that team, and then they got knocked out in round 2. And, and then the 02-03 Canucks as well, it felt like there was something special going on there. So I'm giving the nod to the 2010-2011 Stanley Cup finalist Vancouver Canucks, who also were the team that had the most points of 117. But it's hard not to go with the 91-92 Canucks. I'm just saying right now. That team was fantastic. Had Larionov, it had Bure as a rookie on it, and just really good all-around lineup. But I thought, you know what, Shannon, it might be nostalgia speaking. So don't do the 91-92 Canucks on this one. Just have it the 2010-2011 Canucks. People tell you in the comment section how, if for people who are old enough, how do you feel that the 91-92 Canucks would have fared against the 2010-2011 Canucks? Because I think the 91-92 Canucks were a better team. However, they lost in round 2, and these Canucks went to the Stanley Cup Finals. So again, right? Points percentage, wins, and all that. Let's get to it. Most wins is against LA with 114. Makes sense. They've been in LA's division for a long time. Points percentage against Columbus, they do quite well. 689 winning percentage against Columbus. So that one's kind of a surprise. And this year, of course, against Columbus, not as much. Goals for against Calgary, 880. So they score a lot of goals against Calgary. But in goals per game, Tampa Bay, 3.51. That surprises me. That really genuinely surprises me that their best goals against, or goals for per game, is against Tampa. Goals against doesn't surprise me because, again, it's a team from the 90s expansion and beyond. It's Ottawa, 2.33 goals against per game. Not a huge surprise there. But Tampa being the team they score the most goals against, I just checked. They're not the team they allow the most goals against. Although this year, that one game in Tampa, dear Lord. Notable captains. Bo Horvat, of course, is their captain now, and I think he'll be their captain for some time to come. Henrik Sedin. Roberto Luongo. That was a mistake. What was Mike Gillis thinking again? Like, I mean, I kind of sort of get it. Like, you look in Vegas, Marc-Andre Fleury, unofficially captain. Sure, you can see that through their first 3 seasons, but you can't make the captain the goaltender. You can't. Didn't make any sense. And then before that, we had Marcus Naslund. We had, of course, Mark Messier. You have to mention Messier when you talk about the Canucks because he was captain and he was part of the team that, well, when they decided to tear things down after 94, they tore it down, and dramatically. Trevor Linden, of course, captain before him. Stan Smeel and Orland Kurtenbach, the first captain the Canucks had, I believe, captain for their first 5 years. And the Big O. You see him often when the Canucks have throwback nights. Very, very popular with Canuck fans. I know I don't have him under the all-time greats. I have him here under notable captains, so it's not nothing. Anyways, consecutive playoff appearances. This is where you find out the Canucks don't make the playoffs for a long time, often. 79 to 84, 91 through 96. 6 seasons in a row that they were in the playoffs, twice. So they've reached that level twice, and it's been tough finding a Canucks team that can stay there. And when you look at this, they weren't contenders in the 79 through 84 portion of things. 91 through 96, they had 92 and 93, they were good. 94, they go to the Stanley Cup Finals when it looked like they were on a downswing. And then 95, 96, those 2 years, they were definitely on the downswing. And then 97, they missed. And, of course, they haven't made the playoffs since 2015. So, again, and people talk about how you're really hard on your favorite team. They've made the playoffs 27 out of 49 years. That means they've missed the playoffs 22 out of 49 years. The numbers haven't been great. I want to see sustained success. I want to see that 6 seasons wiped out. I want to see a team that makes the playoffs 10 plus years in a row. I want to see that commitment to excellence. And I think we could see that for the Canucks at some point soon with the young roster they have put together. I don't get Pettersson jerseys just because I like getting jerseys with names on them. Most of my jerseys are blanks for a reason, because then they don't end up being dated. So that's part of the reason I do that, because I'm like, well, if I get a jersey with that name on the back, then when the guy gets traded, right? So that's why I do it the way I do it. Now, with best coach, I went with Alain Vigneault. Alain Vigneault, and you could make the argument for Mark Crawford, an argument for different reasons. Crawford took over during the Naslund era and turned that team around. And Alain Vigneault, for me, was the best coach the Canucks had. At the time they parted ways with him, I understood, but it was a shame at the same time because I thought Vigneault was excellent. I understood why he had to go. I understood the complaints about Vigneault having certain favorite teams, named Tanner Glass and Aaron Rome and others, but Mark Crawford had that. Every coach does. Every coach has a player that they put in the lineup because they know what they're going to get from him and they trust him. And the fans, meanwhile, watching are going, wait, he's in the lineup again? Why is he in the... Wait, he's on the power play? Right? So That's what happens. Now, GM, I went with Pat Quinn. At the time Pat Quinn takes over, what's interesting is the Canucks were meddling, kind of, sort of. He was with the Kings, and then suddenly it's, wait, you're talking to the Canucks while you're with the Kings? What happened here? And then that ended up turning into this big blow-up. And then Quinn takes over, and things didn't get better right away. And there were Canuck fans that said, wait, this was a big hubbub for a guy that's not getting us anywhere. But au contraire, they would get somewhere. And Pat Quinn put together some fantastic trades. Thank you, St. Louis, by the way, for being so charitable during that era. And then I would throw in an honorable mention to Brian Burke as well. The fault that Burke had was goaltending. He never really completely fixed the goaltending. And I remember when they got Dan Cloutier, and he had faith in Cloutier, and we all went, why? And then Cloutier was okay, but then Cloutier went out, and then it was just... Or actually, before Cloutier got here, you had the goaltending carousel. And then that ends up leading to Luongo after Nonis takes over. And then, of course, Nonis doesn't last. You get Gillis, and then Benning's in. There's a reason that I'm not one of these people that's like, they need to fire Benning. I've gone through enough general managers in my lifetime already. So many general managers have come through Vancouver. And, you got to have faith in somebody's vision at some point. So, for overall, though, general manager, Pat Quinn. And Pat Quinn gets honorable mention for coach as well. Let's not forget, he was coaching behind the bench for some of Vancouver's best seasons. So, yeah, he gets an honorable mention there for coach, too. He was a Canuck list is not as long as it could have been. Because, again, I'm trying to go through names that I don't think people may realize were members of the Canucks. They might, though. Murray Bannerman played one game as a Canuck. Gary Lehman, towards the end there, he was a Canuck. Matthew Schneider, the end of his career, he was a Canuck. Derek Sanderson, yes, that Derek Sanderson from 1972. He was a Canuck for 16 games. Sean Burke. Now, if you're a Canuck fan, you remember Sean Burke because of the fight with Buffalo. But if you're not a fan of the Canucks, you may forget about Sean Burke having been in Vancouver for that fight with Buffalo. He came in, he was part of that goalie carousel. He came in and played like about 16 games for Vancouver, and then he went out, and then they brought in Gar Snow, and oh, man. Anyways, so yeah, Burke. Jeff Sanderson was a Canuck. It didn't work out. He was not. It was a good trade at the time. It looked like it was going to work, and then it didn't. Samuel Paulson. He had some games as a Vancouver Canuck as well. Matt Sundin, half a season as a Vancouver Canuck, which meant that he was it was weird. There's Mike Gillis. I'll give you $20 million. At which point Sundin goes, wait, no, what are you crazy? $10 million a year for? Do you understand? It's the only time I've ever seen a player say, you're offering me how much? No, I won't take that much. So weird. Jimmy Carson was a Canuck, and he didn't experience a lot of success with Vancouver. Rick Vive, of course, before being traded to Toronto with Bill Derlego, who was a Canuck as well. Mike Ridley was a Canuck, not very long, and I remember being upset when he left. I do tend to get attached. I did tend to get attached to players and get upset when they left a lot when I was a kid. So whether it was Andrew Castles or Brian Bradley, or in this case Mike Ridley, there were players that would come in and play, and I'd be like, okay, now hold on to him. Oh, he's gone. What are you talking about? Esa Tikkanen. Tikkanen came in. He was damaged goods when he got to Vancouver. Vancouver's medical staff put him together, and then when he left Vancouver, he took pot shots at Vancouver, and it's like, but they fixed you. Pavel Demitra. So Pavel Demitra was a Canuck for, I think it was 94 games I was seeing. And Jim Nill, current general manager of the Dallas Stars. He was part of the 1982 Stanley Cup Finals run, but he wasn't a Vancouver Canuck for that long. I remember him as being a Canuck for longer than he actually was. So yeah, Jim Nill was a Canuck, and that's where we end this. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And remember, stay home as much as you can, stay safe as much as possible, and I will talk to you again soon.